Hi, I'm Peter Lee, and this is Newsbud's Asia Brief. This week's episode, Shame in San Francisco, American Betrayal at the 1951 San Francisco Peace Conference and the Roots of Korean-Japanese Conflict. A continuing frustration for U.S. strategic planners is the deep mistrust and division between Japan and South Korea. You'd think it would be, you hate communists, we hate communists. You hate China, we hate China. We're both U.S. allies. We should hang out. But it's never like that, as U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has found out as he tries to wrangle Japan and South Korea into line on North Korea policy. The current friction point is furious sparring over the placement of a comfort woman statue in front of the Japanese consulate in Busan, South Korea. It is there to confront and shame Japan over its use of 200,000 Korean women as sex slaves for the Japanese army throughout Asia during World War II. Japan decided to be angry instead of ashamed and withdrew its consul from Busan as a sign of its disapproval. The rancor between Japan and South Korea is deep and has its roots in a century of injustice. Awkwardly for the United States, the key injustice is the U.S. and Japan ganging up to screw Korea at the San Francisco Peace Conference of 1951. The San Francisco Conference was the announcement of the new Cold War order in Asia, in which Japan was rehabilitated as America's indispensable partner against communist expansion. World War II was officially in the rearview mirror, and Japan's victims were called on to suck it up and let bygones be bygones. The biggest ripoff of the San Francisco Treaty was to allow Japan to set aside indefinitely the issue of reparations for countries it had ravaged during the war, like Korea. As for Korea, nobody wanted to talk about Korea. In fact, keeping Korea out of the San Francisco Conference and the Koreans in legal limbo was vital to the joint U.S.-Japanese effort. Japan had annexed Korea to the empire in 1910. Japanese rule over Korea did not go very well. Rule was often clumsy and brutal, and it was resisted. And when the horror of World War II descended, Korea was stripped of hundreds of thousands of its people to serve the Japanese war machine as soldiers and policemen, workers in its mines and factories, and sex slaves. Approximately 500,000 died. Because of the 1910 annexation, Koreans lived and died as full citizens of the Japanese Empire. According to the US and Japan, all those things that Japan had done to Koreans before and during World War II were legal, because Koreans were citizens of the Japanese Empire and subject to Japanese law. Just like Japanese citizens on the main islands, therefore, they were not entitled to compensation for their suffering and ill treatment during the war. But as the Japanese Empire crumbled in the waning days of World War II, it appears Japan decided to abandon its dreams of empire and reinvent itself as a mono-ethnic nationalistic bastion, as Ataturk reinvented the core of the Ottoman Empire as Turkey after the catastrophe of World War I. That meant dumping Korea and forgetting the Koreans, especially the hundreds of thousands of Koreans still living in Japan as a result of Japan's colonial adventure on the Korean peninsula and its wartime need for Korean labor. The U.S. government colluded with Japan to exclude Korea, the Korean people, and their awkward and embarrassing legal, financial, and moral issues from the peace conference and give Japan a free hand in handling its Korean problem. As soon as the San Francisco Treaty was ratified and Japan regained its sovereignty, it passed a law stripping Koreans of their Japanese citizenship and turning them into stateless persons. In 1965, South Korea's Park dictatorship concluded an agreement to normalize relations with Japan that many Koreans regarded as a sellout. Japan promised $300 million in cash and $500 million in soft loans. And, with the encouragement of the United States, the Republic of Korea endorsed the San Francisco Treaty as a final settlement. The resultant demonstrations and rioting brought martial law to the streets of Seoul. As far as Japan was concerned, that was the end of it. It had no obligation either for 35 years of colonization or for its conduct during the war. But for Korea, it was just the beginning of decades of legal arguing and moral hectoring in an attempt to get Japan to acknowledge it had done wrong on the Korean peninsula. The issue that has come to define Korean-Japanese confrontation is that of the comfort women. This was an especially compelling issue because apparently only Korean and Chinese women were subjected to forced conscription as sex workers serving the Japanese military, not ethnic Japanese or Okinawans. This gave the lie to Japanese claims of equal treatment to Koreans as full Japanese citizens during the war and exposed the exploitative and colonial aspect of Japanese rule. The Japanese government bobbed and weaved to try to minimize the public relations fallout of the wrenching testimony of Korean women who were taken from their homes, shipped overseas to military brothels, and forced to have sex with up to 50 Japanese soldiers a day. No, smearing them as willing prostitutes was not the way out. The Japanese government stammered out some apologies and mediated the establishment of a Comfort Woman Fund, funded by private contributions. In other words, no acknowledgement of Japanese government responsibility, no admission of legal liability for acts during the period of Japanese rule, and no obligation to pay compensation. When arch-nationalist Shinzo Abe came to power, Japan rejected the victor's justice of World War II and changed the frame of Korean dialogue to Japan's victimhood. Instead of talking about the millions of Korean lives shattered by Japan's imperial misdeeds, he obsessed on 13 Japanese abductees kidnapped by North Korea. And, by an act of the Japanese parliament, it was officially confirmed that Japan had never officially apologized for the treatment of the comfort women. No surprise, then, that resentment still smolders at the heart of Japanese-Korean relations. In the United States, jumping into bed with Japanese war criminals is seen as George Kennan's masterstroke that kept America in the game in Western Pacific after the Second World War. In fact, the post-World War II security structure in Asia is called the San Francisco System. As one group of U.S. diplomats put it, beginning of a beautiful friendship. The U.S. has pretty much written the betrayal of Korea at San Francisco out of history. Maybe that's why it finds Korea-Japan hostility so baffling. Let me try to help. Instead of the beautiful relationship between the United States and Japan, think of San Francisco as the horrible end of a horrible relationship between Korea and Japan. A bad marriage. The husband, Japan, beat the wife, Korea, raped the daughters, sent the sons off to die on battlefields and in the mines. Then, he abandoned the family, found a crooked court, and bribed the judge. He got an ironclad divorce and dodged alimony. Then, the husband married the crooked judge, the United States, and started living a new life of riches and honor. And then, they came back to tell the ex-wife she's not doing enough to make the relationship work. If Koreans don't find that kind of relationship beautiful, maybe we can forgive them. For Newsbud members who want to learn more about the U.S. and Japanese government's 60-year effort to evade responsibility for Japan's dark legacy of colonial rule over Korea, an expanded version of this report is available on the Newsbud website as an audio file. Thanks for watching, and thank you for watching Newsbud. If you like what you see, please tell your friends and encourage them to join.